Hey fearsome friends, tonight's stories are coming from the dark web, a place that I never want to visit. 2 of these stories were featured on Mortis Media's channel and are too good not to share. So get cozy, comfy, warm, lock your doors and turn off that laptop, and stay safe out there on the internet. I was a casual customer of the dark web, ordering from it for a while. I got pretty big into it and started buying slightly bulkier packages of drugs. If you were a regular to the dark web, then you'd know the markets on there. The one in particular, called Alphabay, was the best of the best. It was the Amazon of drugs and fraud, basically. However, one day the site went down mysteriously, and everyone assumed the owners had just been scamming everyone for their Bitcoin, which was partially true. But in the background it was actually seized by the DEA. After that, everyone flocked to a new site called Hansa, which had some sketchy design features, but it was the next best alternative. It turned out, though, that the Dutch police had taken over the site, and with the cooperation of multiple governments, they ran a drug distribution onion site, using over $1 million of buyers' transactions for around a month. They were also gathering information from unsuspecting users, including me, who were buying with faulty security practices. I started freaking out. Imagine you were trafficking drugs through the mail, and the Attorney General at the time, Jeff Sessions, makes a speech on live television, explaining that he was going to crack down on this practice, and was saying specifically how doomed everyone on this Hansa site was because they have been gathering data for over a month. He also says that the site is now closed, putting a banner in its place that reads that everyone who has purchased from this site will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I was crapping myself for a month, as many arrests did occur, but luckily, I guess, I wasn't important enough and nothing happened to me. A few years ago I did something terrible. Sometimes that I really wish I hadn't though, as it's something I can never take back. It all started when my girlfriend, now ex, broke up with me. Now I know this might seem trivial and just a part of life growing as a person. However, unfortunately for me, it had the complete reverse effect. I know you'll think I'm childish and that I should have just taken it on the chin, and you'd be right. But I didn't. I was hurt. Actually, I was more than hurt. I was offended, insulted. I mean, how could she? After everything I'd done for her. It was me who gave her a place to live. It was me who helped her pay off her debts. It was me who helped her get a job. And she wants to throw it all back in my face. I wasn't going to allow that to happen without punishment. I was so down and furious I couldn't even sleep. I was just so frustrated and angry I could honestly feel my body shaking with rage. So one night, with hatred and darkness in my heart, I turned on my laptop. Now I wasn't and I'm not a stranger to the dark web. I've spent countless hours trying and failing to navigate it, only ever finding the usual typical drug sites, honey trap sites, and of course forums. Lots and lots of forums. And although I didn't really know what I was looking for, or even where to find it if I did, in truth, subconsciously, I guess in some way I knew. I just wanted for her to hurt. I wanted her to hurt like she hurt me. I wanted her to feel the embarrassment I had felt and suffered at her hands, and I wanted to humiliate her like she had humiliated me. I still had photos and videos of her from our time together, personal ones, shall we say. And in my pent-up anger and depressed state, I thought it was a good idea to use these against her. So I began to search, clicking link after link, until eventually I clicked on something that caught my attention. It was a forum called the Naughty List. It started with the question, "Do you know someone who has been bad? If so, maybe you should put them on the naughty list. Perfect, I thought. This is it. I'll upload the personal photos and videos I have of her on there, and maybe even link her social media, and we'll see who's laughing then. I thought about adding her address, but she was back living with her mother, so I drew the line there. I know, how noble of me. However, the forum wasn't what I expected. You couldn't directly upload to their homepage. There were different sections to it, or punishments as they called it. I remember thinking how dramatic. These are just some of the several different sections. Elf on a Shelf, Krampus, and Frosty Fields. Yeah, I know, very Christmassy, right? I thought so. It kind of made me chuckle, and made me all the more take it less seriously. Elf on a Shelf kind of made me crack half a smile, but that's not what I went with. I chose something called Sleigh Snatcher. It was kind of funny to me. After clicking on it, I had to wait a good minute and a half before this bright white page loaded up, filled with a few black text boxes and a title that read, "Santa is waiting to write up his naughty list. Please fill in the details and he'll do the rest." Cute, but I just thought it was kind of stupid too, though I filled it in regardless. Name, age, birthday, and links to the person's social media. It was all there. Everything I was so desperately looking for. And of course, photo uploads. Jackpot, I remember slyly thinking and smiling to myself, half cackling in the process. It wouldn't allow me to upload any videos, but the photos were more than enough for me. It also asked for the person's address, but as I said earlier, I wasn't ready to go that far. But I did write in her hometown, our hometown, something I really wish I hadn't done now. So after I had finished filling in her information, without even a moment's hesitation, I clicked submit. After a few seconds, a little text box appeared asking, "Are you sure?" Santa won't forget. He checks that list twice. All names are final. I smugly pressed yes, and that was that. Perfect, I thought. Until, that is, when I was redirected to another page. This page took a few minutes to upload, but when it did, it caught me off guard. It simply said, "Thank you for submitting to the naughty list. We really appreciate it. Sit back, relax, and Santa will sleigh snatch those ho-ho-hos. Santa will empty his sack and this person in one. He knows when you've been naughty." Now this took me back a bit. It took me a few minutes to process what it was saying, and when I had, I just laughed. As awful as that sounds, but it's true. I mean, come on, it was gross, and yeah, admittedly sick, but it was kind of funny, and there's no way it could be real anyway, so I didn't care, and I had achieved my goal. I thought when the job is done and it's all uploaded, people will see them, message her on social media, and then she'll be the one who is humiliated. So feeling better about myself, I calmly and confidently shut down my laptop and wiped everything correctly, making sure I couldn't be traced or implicated in any way. I was already heavily protected, I knew that, but as anyone who uses the dark web will tell you, it's better to be safe than sorry. The next morning I awoke with the biggest, most disturbing smile I have ever produced. I honestly must have looked like the grinning Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland. I was so damn pleased with myself. But looking back on it now, it honestly makes me feel sick. Then though, I couldn't wait to see the fruits of my labour. I was so excited to see her suffer. I wanted her to hurt, and I wanted her to know, well, more accurately think, that it was me, but with no real way to prove it. I wanted to break her, and for her to feel as worthless as she had made me feel. But, to my absolute dismay and disappointment, nothing happened. I waited and waited, but nothing. No angry phone calls or texts, no outraged social media post, nothing at all. Surely it had worked, right? There was no way I could check, and I couldn't find that link again even if I tried. So a few more days went by, and by now my excitement had faded, and I felt dejected and genuinely upset that it clearly hadn't worked. Nobody would be as calm as this if it had, and I couldn't exactly ask her or go check. That would point the finger straight at me. So after a while I just gave up. In truth, the whole ordeal was now tiresome to me, and as sad as it sounds, it had strangely made me feel better, like I had gotten it all out of my system somehow. A few more days later, I was awoken to a loud knock on my door. The previous drama of my former relationship had completely escaped my mind at this point, and just for some context, I live alone and don't get many visitors all too often, so I was more than annoyed to have been woken up than curious to see who was at my door for whatever reason. So you can imagine my shock when I flung open my door, only to be greeted by the stern faces of 2 police officers. Crap, this is it. I'm going to prison and everyone is going to think I'm some kind of freak. Which I guess in all fairness I was at the time. They asked me if they could come in, and I of course obliged, not wanting to make a scene and make things potentially worse for myself. I remember thinking at the time that they've only asked to come in. As of right now, I'm not under arrest or anything, so I better see what they want. But what they asked me completely and utterly knocked the wind out of me. When was the last time you saw Katie? I was speechless, and for a second I must have looked like the most guilty person in the world. Realizing this, I quickly shook the look of surprise and dread off my face, and answered as calmly as I could muster. Not since we broke up, so around 2 weeks, I replied. This was true, but it still didn't save me from their line of inquiry and their barrage of intense scrutiny and questioning. Where were you on the night of the 6th? I told them the truth. At home. Can anyone verify this? They said. Well, no, I live alone, but I did get dropped off at home after work by one of my colleagues, which is routine after every shift, so he can, I guess. And at what time was this? I told him the truth. It was around 10:30. The cameras at work should show me leaving at about 10:20, and it's only about 10 minutes drive here. Did you leave your property at any point after you returned? He inquired. No, I said meekly, but as authoritatively as I could, I retorted. And the CCTV outside the flats will verify this. His intense stare into my eyes seemed to waver and loosen ever so slightly, so I thought I'd push my luck and ask, what's this all about? He stated that although he can't give me details of an ongoing investigation, Katie had been reported missing and had not been seen for close to a week. She was last seen by her mother leaving their home to shop and browse the stores, but she never returned. The police officers left soon after that, and actually thanked me for my time. They did check the CCTV with my boss and colleague, who confirmed my story and that I was telling the truth. Days turned into weeks, and still nothing from Katie. It seemed as though she had just vanished into thin air. I couldn't believe it. It couldn't be, could it? It couldn't have been because of me. I thought maybe it was some creep that had stalked her socials and found her address after I'd posted them, along with the images, but surely it just had to be a coincidence. That stupid forum couldn't be real. I mean, Santa's naughty list. Come on, get a grip, I thought to myself. The longer it went on, the more horrible I felt. I know I wasn't physically responsible, but in one way or another, I had caused this, or at least put the wheels in motion. I felt just as guilty as if I had done something to her. I mean, this is the girl that I once loved, the girl I still love. And I had done this. I had caused this. And her poor mother. They had been estranged for years, and it was me who finally got them to reconcile. And for what? So I could just destroy her worse than she could have ever possibly imagined. I couldn't live with the guilt and the immense shame. I tried to get on normally with my life, but it was impossible. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. but I knew I deserved this pain. I would cringe every time I caught myself feeling sorry for myself. I'm no victim. I'm a monster. A wolf in sheep's clothing, if you like. I deserved it, not her. And I was so selfish, so disgusting and pathetic. I took to drinking to make myself sleep. Anything to numb the pain. Anything to get the image of her face and the sounds of her screams out of my head. I couldn't go to the police. How could I? If I'd have confessed, my life was as good as over, selfish as it was. I just didn't believe it would even help find her if I did. Maybe I was just being a coward. But it was hopeless, and she was gone. I waited every morning for an update, but every no new information today update killed a little piece of me each and every time. It was absolute torture, until one day when they did find her. She was found in an old abandoned factory in the outskirts of the next town over. I couldn't believe it. I could feel my throat tighten to the point where I was struggling to breathe when I heard the bad news. I begged with whoever or whatever could hear me that it must be some kind of mistake. But unfortunately there are no mistakes. I wanted her to suffer so much, and I guess I got my wish. She was found stuffed down one of the now defunct chimneys, and her body was stuffed inside a sack. A toy sack, to be exact. I couldn't believe it. I felt sick. I feel sick thinking about it now. This must be some kind of sick joke, I pleaded, trying and failing to convince myself. She was found completely naked, and her body had badly deteriorated by this point. But they knew it was her. They knew because stuffed into one of her eye sockets was a small piece of paper. A small piece of paper that read, "The naughty list." "Katie, you should have been good." I blacked out and collapsed where I was standing. I hit my head pretty hard. And when I regained consciousness, I hoped and prayed it was just a bad dream. But of course it wasn't. It was real. It was all real. And it was all because of me. And I'm sorry, Katie. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for what they did to you. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I have to live with guilt every day now, and not a day goes by that I don't think about confessing or ending my own life. In some sick way, I sometimes think that if I did, it would make up for it, or at least make us even somehow. Although I know that would be impossible, as I can't even begin to imagine what they did to you, what they put you through. I can't imagine the fear and terror you must have felt. I can't imagine your final thoughts, or how confused and alone you must have been. I wish I could take it all back, I really do, but I can't. You deserve justice, Katie. You deserve to be able to rest in peace at the very least. Maybe confessing will bring you and your family closure. But regardless of the answer, I'm far too much of a coward for either. My mother and father were killed in a terrible car accident when I was 6 years old, and since then I've been raised by my aunt and uncle in Texas, along with my older cousin. It took me a while to adjust to this new arrangement, but in time I came to accept my aunt and uncle as parental figures. The person I was closest with, though, was my cousin Lacey. We were actually more like brother and sister, really. Living in Texas, we often went hunting and fishing, and my uncle taught us both to be expert marksmen when it came to hog hunting. This comes in handy in the southern United States, where these wild pigs are considered pests due to their effect on the ecosystem. By the time I was 13, I had become a terrific aim, and my uncle sometimes even joked that I would become a police sniper. Over time, my cousin and I both developed an interest in computers. This was in the late 90s, early 2000s, when the internet was a much newer phenomenon, and the idea of an information superhighway was very fascinating to both of us. Now Lacey is 2 years older than me, and thus graduated high school sooner, and she was accepted into the University of Texas with a scholarship in computer sciences. As for me, my initial enthusiasm in computers has since waned into casual interest. My ultimate passion was in sports journalism, and I would end up attending the University of Southern California with a scholarship in that field. In the summer of 2006, I'd finished my sophomore year, while Lacey had graduated from college and was now working for a large technical firm in Houston. It was summer break, and I hadn't seen her in a while, so I flew into town to visit her for a few days. After spending a couple of hours catching up, she brought a subject that has since come back to haunt me. It was the dark web. You see, one of her co-workers had been bragging about spending time there, claiming to have purchased drugs on numerous occasions, and also watching some very hardcore videos that cannot be found anywhere on the mainstream net. Lacey learned that this part of the web could only be accessed if you were really good at hacking. This was some time before Tor software had been developed. Now hacking had become a hobby of hers, so she'd decided to check it out. I figured, what the hell, right? What could be so bad about this dark web? Well, plenty, as it would turn out. As we started browsing, we'd lost count of how many hitmen advertisements, drug dealers, and animal torture videos we came across. Some of the videos were live streams of what seemed to be genuine rapes, which understandably caused both of us to cringe, and we even saw things like crush porn. Apparently there are people out there who are sexually aroused at the sight of baby animals being crushed under stiletto heels. Despite all of these horrors, Lacey had a strange fascination with this place. However, I had already lost interest. Eventually she came across a link entitled TJ's Horror Shop. It sounded corny as hell, but Lacey clicked on it anyway. She was greeted by a message informing her that a show was going to be taking place that night, but that it was members only. The page gave her the option of registering, so she did just that. Southern Nerd 04 was the username she chose, if I remember correctly, and the website accepted her registration. She seemed eager to see what this was all about, but for me it felt very uneasy. From what I had seen so far, these people on the dark web are the type who hide their true colours, and I didn't want to see Lacey associating with people like that. After her registration, we were then greeted by a digital clock, gradually counting down to the beginning of the live stream. It felt like an eternity, but the clock eventually reached 0 and the screen lit up. We saw a man wearing a skull mask, skeleton gloves, and dressed in leather. He was twiddling his fingers like Mr. Burns would, and we heard him speak in a deep, distorted voice. "Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to TJ's Horror Shop. For all the newcomers, it is my pleasure to welcome you into my house of horrors." It seemed like a silly little show, but given everything else we had seen on the dark web, I wasn't convinced that something truly sinister was out of the question. The character went on. Tonight's first victim. There were 2 other men who were also wearing masks and dressed in leather, and they were dragging a third person in front of the camera. His hands were tied behind his back, and there was a bag over his head like he was some kind of hostage. Andrew Fleming of Charlotte, North Carolina, 43 years old, divorced, father of a son and daughter. He has been selected as the first victim of tonight's bloodbath. I began to feel sick to my stomach, and I noticed Lacey was beginning to look nervous. For those of you who are new, my viewers are the ones who get to pick how our victims meet their demise. Your username is selected at random, and after your name is chosen, a box will appear on your screen to offer you several choices. The option you select is the method in which this poor man will die. One of the henchmen ripped the bag off the hostage's head. The man was sobbing in terror and was pathetically begging for his life. I sincerely hoped this was all just an act, but I was becoming more and more convinced otherwise. And now, let the selection process begin. On the left side of the screen, all the usernames of those watching began to briefly flash up at random. Some kind of algorithm was using some sort of lottery system to select who would determine this man's fate. Eventually it settled on the username, Who Gives a Crap 771. Who Gives a Crap 771? One of our favourite guests, TJ shouted in glee. How will Mr. Fleming's life come to a horrifying end? Let's find out. A box appeared that showed the following options. A. Strangulation. B. Mutilation by chainsaw. C. Repeated gunshots. The user chose the third option. Very well. Let the carnage begin. One of the masked henchmen appeared from off-screen, armed with a sawn-off shotgun. He aimed at the man's genitals and fired. Lacey and I both gasped in shock and horror, whilst Mr. Fleming howled in extreme agony. The henchman then lifted the man up and shot him in both kneecaps, causing him to drop back down to the floor and continue begging for mercy. But his pleas fell on deaf ears. The henchman then took out a 9mm pistol and emptied the entire clip into his back. I couldn't bear to watch any more, and I looked away from the computer and lost my lunch. I heard one more gunshot and the man's screaming stopped. What a delightfully gruesome display. Now on to our next guest. The other guys dragged another hostage into view, also bound with a bag over their head. The bag was removed to reveal a young woman not much older than me. Melissa Cartwright of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 24 years old and single. You will be our next victim. Now let's see who decides your fate. As before, the slot at the left of the screen began flashing usernames at random, and much to our horror, it settled on the username Lacey had chosen. Tears began welling up in her eyes. Lucy, shut this damn thing off, I shouted. Southern Nerd 04, a newcomer. We are happy to welcome you into our gruesome family. Now you must choose how Miss Cartwright dies. The small box reappeared, but with several different options than before. Flaying, electrocution, or incineration. Lacey sat frozen. Lacey, get off this page now, I said with a mixture of fear and anger. Several minutes passed and TJ had grown impatient. Well, Southern Nerd, we are waiting. Lacey began frantically pressing buttons, hoping to escape from this awful place. If you don't choose in the next 20 seconds, you will be on our next show, TJ said menacingly. For a moment Lacey appeared to be considering one of the murder options, but before she could choose, I ripped the power cord from its outlet and shut the damn computer off. Lacey broke down sobbing, while I rushed over to comfort her. You don't think they'll find me, do you? She said fearfully. I don't know. I stayed with Lacey a few more days before flying back to Los Angeles. And to be honest, I wanted classes to resume, but it was middle of July. The whole situation with those wackos on the dark web appeared to have blown over, or so I thought. Wednesday, July 19th, 2006, 10:47 p.m. I'd returned to my apartment and flopped down on my bed. I opened up my laptop and was met with a horrifying sight. My generic desktop background had been replaced with an image of a skull mask, the same type of mask worn by TJ and his cronies in that terrible livestream. Then a video box appeared and a video message began to play. Hello there, Jason. It's me, TJ. Shivers went down my spine. How did he learn my name? How the hell did he hack into my laptop? I believe we have a hostage here that might be of interest to you. The camera angle changed to reveal. No, it can't be. Lacey. She was bound and gagged and sobbing in the corner of the room where TJ was filming. There were cuts and bruises on her face. Remember when I told your cousin here that she would be part of our next show? I'm a man of my word, Jason. She had a choice, and she refused to answer the call, and now she will pay the ultimate price. He bent down and pet her hair very creepily. Or will she? I sat motionless, waiting to hear what he would say next. I've decided to make things interesting for our next show. Your cousin will have a chance to survive if, and only if, you eliminate this man. A photograph of a middle-aged man appeared on my screen. Raymond Marshall, 53 years old, of Los Angeles, California. There's no particular reason why I chose this random person, except for the fact that he happens to live near you. And now, you have a simple choice. Will you murder one person to potentially save another? I stared at my laptop, unable to move or speak. I wanted to save Lacey, of course, but was it worth murdering another innocent person? 20 seconds, Jason. Tick-tock, tick-tock. I heard TJ taunting. There was no time to consider anything, and TJ began to count down out loud. 10, 9, 8, 7. Yes, I will do it, I finally managed to force out, and I regretted it almost instantly. So you've agreed to play along? Very well then. You have until the end of our show tonight to carry this out, which will be in a couple of hours. Be warned though, one of my henchmen is currently in Los Angeles, and he's watching your every move. You know, in case you try to chicken out. Oh, and we are also monitoring your communications, so don't even think about warning your target or calling the police. I was trapped. There was no way out of this. I would have to become a murderer if Lacey was going to live, and the thought of it sickened me. If you haven't eliminated your target in 2 hours, my henchman will kill you. Shouldn't be a problem. Your cousin tells me you're an excellent shooter. TJ sent me his address. My target is a 15-minute drive away. A part of me wanted to commit suicide right then and there, but I knew that would be viewed as chickening out, and that would surely get Lacey killed. No, I had to do this. I took a quick shower, then went out to my apartment building's parking garage, taking my laptop with me. I opened up the toolbox in the bed of my pickup truck and pulled out my assault rifle. I stared quietly at the weapon. I brought it with me when I drove out to California 2 years ago and had used it many times for hog hunting, but I hadn't had much time for hunting much of anything since moving here. However, I had cleaned it recently, and I had plenty of ammunition. I pulled the rifle out and tossed it into the back seat of the cab. "Put this on," I heard a voice say. Startled, I turned around and saw a tall man in a hooded sweatshirt wearing a skull mask. "Let me guess, you're that psychopath's puppet," I said sarcastically. "Put this on," he repeated in a more aggressive tone. He was holding a headset in his outstretched hand. I took it from him. "This headset has a small camera planted inside. It will provide visual confirmation that you have carried out your task. Any attempt to tamper with it, and I will kill you." They had all their bases covered. "Such a lovely crowd you hang out with," I said as I climbed into my truck. I saw him turn around and walk away. I couldn't see him or his vehicle anywhere in sight, and with that I started the ignition and began driving to the address TJ had sent me. All the while I saw a dark SUV with tinted windows tailing me the whole way. I tried to make out a license plate, but it was late at night and I couldn't see it. I eventually arrived at the street where my intended target lived. His house was directly across the street from a park, so I decided it would be easier to hide from my target if I parked my truck over there. Meanwhile, the SUV that had been tailing me made a sharp U-turn and parked itself on the other side of the street. They weren't kidding that he was watching my every move. I then opened up my laptop and waited for a video box to appear on the desktop, which is how TJ said he would contact me when they neared the end of their disgusting little show. At about 1:20 a.m., that's exactly what happened. Welcome back again, loyal viewers. We have had quite an entertaining show so far tonight, but we've got quite a finale in store for you. He went off camera and dragged a woman in front of it, hands tied and mouth covered in duct tape. It was Lacey. Will a man end one person's life to possibly save another? Let's find out. Off to Los Angeles we go. In the video box, the image of TJ was replaced with the camera feed from the headset his henchman had given to me earlier. I knew this was my cue to look over at my target's house across the street. I rolled my window down low enough for the muzzle to stick out. TJ's henchman got out of his SUV and walked up the driveway, and apparently the man I was assigned to kill was a night owl. All the lights in his house were on, and I swore I could hear his TV blaring. Maybe he lived alone. The masked man rang the doorbell and stepped off to the side of the house to hide. A man arrived at the door. It was him, my target. "Hello, who's there?" I heard him shout. He took a couple of steps outside, and this was it, my moment of truth. I gathered every ounce of strength and fortitude I could muster, and pulled the trigger. It was a direct hit, right between the eyes. Raymond Marshall was dead before he hit the ground. The henchman emerged from the side of the house and walked up to the corpse and examined it. After doing so, he looked in my direction and gave some kind of hand gesture, presumably a signal of verification. Well, there you have it. Our friend did indeed have it in him to commit this murder. "Since I am in a generous mood, I will not kill his cousin," I heard TJ say on my laptop. The henchman got back into his SUV and drove off into the night. I watched as he drove away and breathed a sigh of relief. But that relief was short-lived. I saw TJ walk off camera, and another one of his cronies walked into view, armed with a shotgun. After a slight hesitation, he shot Lacey dead. I was in utter shock and disbelief. Even though I had done exactly what this monster had ordered me to do, my cousin was still murdered. I had committed an act I found to be reprehensible, and it was all for nothing. I spent the next 2 days sobbing in despair in my bedroom. My uncle called and told me that he and my aunt had filed a missing persons report. They had tried to contact Lacey for several days, but couldn't get hold of her. I feigned ignorance about what had happened, because I just couldn't bring myself to tell them. I lay in my bed pondering what to do next. Those monsters had to be punished, but one doesn't maintain a murder show on the dark web without being masterful at covering their tracks. But even the most careful criminals slip up eventually. Then I remembered something. The headset I had worn that night, the one with the camera installed. Could it possibly still have footage on it? Maybe not. They'd probably deleted it by now. But I decided it was worth a shot. It's not like I had any other options. I hadn't taken computer lessons in a while, but I remembered the basic hacking tricks Lacey had taught me. I put the headset next to my laptop and went to work. It was hard work, but after several hours I finally figured out how to hack into the camera. I expected to see nothing but a black screen, but to my surprise, I had discovered a memory file in the camera. I clicked the file, and yes, footage from the murder. They had slipped up and forgotten to delete the memory. But that was only the starting point. I needed something else to go on. The henchman had his mask on the whole time, making it damn near impossible to identify him. The video reached the point where the henchman drove off, and I noticed something. There was a short moment where the vehicle passed under a bright street lamp before disappearing into the darkness. I could see a license plate, but the image quality was too blurry. I hacked in a little more to see if I could clear up the resolution, and it worked. The picture was now clear. It was a Nevada license plate. I was one step closer. I typed the plate number into the database, and the vehicle came up. It was a 2002 Toyota 4Runner, registered to a man named Zachary Parker of Reno, Nevada, which was about a 7-hour drive north. I was also able to acquire his address, and I was now on the trail of my cousin's killers. "You're going down, TJ. I'll make sure of that, even if it kills me." I packed food, rope, duct tape, a handgun that I used for home defense, and a hunting knife that I had brought with me when I moved out here. Before departing LA, I stopped at a local store to pick up mace, a taser gun, and a tape recorder. I was loaded and prepared to exact revenge against these psychopaths. I told my roommates that I was taking a short trip and that I'd be back in a few days, but truthfully, I had no idea if I would be coming back at all. These were some bad characters I was dealing with. I departed at around noon, but heavy traffic added another hour to my trip. I reached Reno at around 10 at night, and since I lacked familiarity with the area, it took me another hour to find the address of the SUV driver. Eventually I arrived on a quiet street in a nice-looking neighborhood. It was a single-story, medium-sized house, similar in appearance to the one I had grown up in Texas. And there it was in the driveway, the black Toyota 4Runner with that same license plate number. I was a nervous wreck, and it took me several deep breaths to calm myself down. Eventually I worked up enough courage, grabbed my duffel bag, and stepped out of my truck. Slowly and quietly I snuck up to the house, hoping against hope that nobody would notice me. But suddenly the garage door began to open up. I ducked to the side of the house to keep myself out of sight, and a man stepped out from the garage entrance and climbed into the SUV to start it up. But he wasn't going anywhere. He simply moved his vehicle into the garage before shutting it off. I heard the sound of the vehicle door open and shut again, and this is where I took my chance. I bolted from my hiding spot and snuck into the garage at the corner, using the SUV as a concealment. Thankfully, the man didn't notice me. He reclosed the garage door, shut off the light, and walked back into the house. I stayed crouched in the corner for another half hour, believing he might be going to bed soon since it was late at night. Eventually I made it to the door leading into the garage and opened it as quietly as I could. I had entered the laundry room, and there was another door which I also opened. I was now in a dark hallway, and at the end was a bedroom with its door partially open and the light on. I heard the sound of a shower shutting off, and a few minutes later I heard gargling noises. These were the longest few minutes of my life as I waited for the right moment to strike. I slowly crept down the dark hallway, careful not to make a sound. I set down the duffel bag and pulled out my taser. I then heard a slight creaking noise of the man sitting down on his bed, and that's when I made my move. I burst through the bedroom door and shot the man in the chest with the taser gun. I made sure he was electrocuted for a good long time, because I wanted him to suffer. Plus, I wanted to ensure that he wouldn't be able to fight back while I used my rope to bind him to his bedroom chair. Some time passed and he had recovered from his disorientation. It took him a moment to realize he was tied up, and he began shaking frantically. Then he looked up at me and let out a gasp. What the hell are you doing here? How did you find me?" "You got sloppy," I said tersely. "Bet you never thought you'd see me again, did you?" He glared at me contemptuously. "Give me names and locations." "I'm not telling you anything," he said defiantly. "Fine. I've got plenty of time. In the meantime, we're going to see just how much you can take. See how tough you really are." He gulped nervously. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Zachary. Names." "Never," he shouted. and that's when I pulled out my handgun and shot him in the left kneecap. He screamed like a banshee, and I couldn't help but feel satisfaction watching him suffer. Not so tough when your victims fight back, are you? Start talking. Go to hell. Maybe I will, but I'm taking you all down with me. I then pulled out my pepper spray and blasted him squarely in the face, which led to more screaming. I made sure he got a large dose, and his eyes watered like a faucet, and mucus began dripping out of his nose. Talk. You're getting nothing from me. All right then. Looks like I need to up the ante. I reached once more into the duffel bag and pulled out the hunting knife. Let's see. Your fingers, your toes, or your family jewels? He stared at me silently, sweating profusely. I'll settle with the family jewels then, I said, and moved in closer and began to press the knife against his crotch. All right, I'll talk. I pulled back and smiled with satisfaction. That's more like it. He spilled the beans on the names and addresses of every one of his co-workers. He even gave the address of the abandoned warehouse where they hold their live streams. He said they were planning to have another show tomorrow night. And as much as I hated this man, I didn't actually want to kill him. I would have preferred Zachary and his buddies be kept alive to suffer in prison forever. But I also couldn't take the chance that he would warn his friends that I was trailing them. I pressed the gun to his temple, and then I heard a whimper. But it wasn't coming from Zachary. It came from his bedroom closet. What the hell was that? It's nothing. There's nothing there. I opened up the closet door and was heartbroken at what I saw. In the corner lay 2 children, a boy and a girl, tied up and gagged, cuts and bruises all over. They couldn't have been any older than 8 or 9. I dialed the police to report a kidnapping, then departed Zachary's house unnoticed. With an arrest and detainment, he wasn't going to be able to warn TJ. I spent the better part of the following day staking out the abandoned warehouse Zachary had told me about. I couldn't keep my mind focused on anything else except bringing these guys down. Eventually the sun began to set, and I decided to make the move on the factory, whether TJ and his cronies had arrived or not. I took the rear entrance, hoping it would draw less attention, and I had my sniper rifle, flashlight, hunting knife, and taser with me. If what I had seen from their live stream was any indication, they always came armed. I opened the back door slowly, but it still creaked loudly. I tried to maintain my bravado, but that creaking noise made me fear I had alerted them to my presence. Despite this fear, though, I chose to press forward, my rifle pointed in front of me at all times. The factory was dim and quiet, and every little noise I heard made me shiver. But I wasn't going to turn back now. I had come too far down the tracks to abort at this point. There was a musty smell in the air, but it soon gave way to the smell of death. I recognized it instantly. Spend as much time hunting wild hogs as I have, and you become very familiar with the smell of decaying flesh. I traced the stench to a door at the end of a hallway. I opened it up and shined my flashlight into a pitch-black room. Sweeping the beam across, I saw a pile of dead bodies, some of whom were children. I then shone the light to the other side of the room and saw 3 people bound and gagged in a corner, a man and 2 women. Using my hunting knife, I cut the ropes that bound them, when one of the women captives said, "Are you a cop?" "No, I'm just here to help," I replied. Then I pointed at the dead bodies. "Last night's victims?" I asked. "Yes. They haven't got around to burying them yet. They're running some kind of sick internet show here, and we were next in line," said the male captive. The other female hostage was too traumatized to speak. Can't say I blame her. "You 3 get on out of here and head for the police station. We're shutting them down," I said. "You sure you'll be okay?" the male hostage asked. "I'll be fine. These guys aren't as tough as they look." Now go." Without missing a beat, the trio bolted out of there, and out the rear entrance. I decided to leave the door to this room open, just to give them a shock when they'd arrived. I reached the main area of the factory. It was largely empty aside from a few desks, a computer with a webcam, and some extension cords. I noticed a step ladder leading up to the catwalk above. I decided this would be a good place to hide while I continued to wait for their arrival, and the wait would not be very long. Less than 10 minutes later, 4 men entered the building through the front door. They weren't wearing their masks, and they were all armed with shotguns as expected. The leader was tall, lean, and had blonde hair. "Where the hell is Zachary? Have you been able to get hold of him yet?" The blonde-haired man shouted in frustration. I quickly deduced this was TJ. "I've been trying to get hold of him all day, but what?" "I drove by his house earlier today. The place was crawling with cops. I think one of his neighbors knew about those kidnapped children," the henchman replied. TJ let out an exasperated sigh. "Fine, we'll just have to do without him. I should have known bringing him on board was a mistake. He always was a little careless." "Oh, you have no idea, TJ," I quietly muttered to myself from my hiding spot. TJ approached the desk with the computer and turned it on. "Bring out those 3 hostages. We'll begin tonight's show within the next half an hour." "You got it, boss," one of the other men said as he disappeared down the hallway. I readied my hunting rifle from my perch on the catwalk. The moment of confrontation was arriving. TJ fiddled around on the computer for a bit when he suddenly heard a loud scream. "The hell was that?" TJ said. The henchman reappeared, looking frantic and sweating. "The hostages! They're gone!" "What do you mean they're gone?" TJ asked incredulously. "They're gone! The storage room was wide open. I walked in and they weren't there. The ropes had been cut." I saw TJ face-palming. "How the hell did... Never mind. If those people somehow escaped, they're bringing the cops back here with them. We'd better leave now." I wasn't going to give them that chance. I aimed the rifle at the henchman's kneecap and fired. He yelped in pain and dropped to the floor. TJ and his 2 remaining accomplices began frantically looking around, hoping to find the person who shot their friend. One of them walked directly in front of my sightline, and I had a clear shot at his back. I fired and struck him in the spinal cord. He won't be walking for the rest of his life. Now it was down to 2. The last of TJ's cronies rushed to his friend's side, and I blasted him in the right knee, but this victory was short-lived. I heard a gunshot ricochet behind me. TJ had spotted me. I got up and ran as fast as I could across the catwalk, when I heard another gunshot, then another. He pumped the shotgun once more, but I heard a clicking noise when he pulled the trigger. Using this opportunity, I shot TJ twice in his left leg, and he was down like the rest of them. I climbed down from the nearest ladder to get back to floor level. TJ was groaning in pain and holding onto his leg. I decided to have a little more fun as I approached him. I fired another round, this time into his shoulder. I took out the hunting knife and made an underhand toss, and it landed in his right leg. Finally, I tased him and made him squirm and flop like a fish on dry land. "Oh, how the mighty have fallen," I said smugly. Once TJ regained his composure, he looked up at me. "You. Surprised to see me? But how did... Wait, don't tell me, Zachary. Like you said, he was always a little careless, and this time it came back to bite you in the ass." TJ chuckled. "Okay, so now what? You'll be going to prison with the rest of us, or have you forgotten the murder you committed on our behalf?" I angrily struck TJ in his chest cavity with the butt of my rifle. "On your behalf? You blackmailed me. You said you would set Lacey free if I killed Raymond Marshall." "No, I said I might not kill her if you killed him. And in case you've forgotten, it was my henchman who pulled the trigger on your cousin. Close enough. These men follow your orders like blind sheep. Her blood is on your hands as well as the blood of Raymond Marshall. You know damn well I wasn't a willing participant. You're right, you weren't. Marshall's death was my responsibility. But so what? You can't prove it. You're still going down with the rest of us. Actually, I can prove it. And with that I took out my tape recorder and played back our entire conversation. Face it, even if a DA pressed charges against me, do you really think any jury will vote to convict once they hear the whole story? TJ was silent for a while. Eventually he spoke up. Are you going to kill me? As soon as he said those words, we heard sirens off in the distance, and they were getting closer. I looked down on TJ. No, I won't kill you. Your cellmates will do that for me. Hey there, it's me again, Miss Fearsome. I hope you enjoyed my video. If you did, then please hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to support me further, please check out my Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. So until next time, stay happy, stay safe, and remember, keep being creepy.